Hi, my name's Roxy. Tell me, do you remember the most terrible day of your life and the happiest one? In my life, I happen to have one of them after the other. At first, I was in a real hell, and then I cried with happiness when I was able to get out of it. Do you want to know what happened to me? Then make sure you watch this video to the end. I was born and raised in a fairly well off family. My dad runs a large company. My mom is a fashion designer. You've probably guessed they were very busy people. I can say I rarely saw my parents at home. Mostly, I was with nannies or grandparents. I had a big, beautiful room with a real princess bed that any girl would dream of. Lots of beautiful dresses, toys, but I miss the most important things. Goodnight kisses, bedtime stories, hugs, or cupcakes for the school fair. I cried a lot and I was always sad. Every time my parents came home, I asked them to stay more, play with me some more, go to cafes with me, or to an amusement park. I cried. But they apologized and said they loved me very much, but they had a lot of things to do, and I felt lonely again. Over time, I got used to being alone. I became a very reserved kid. Despite the fact I understood everything in class and prepared my homework very well, I was too shy to answer in front of the class. That's why I had some problems with my academic performance. I studied at an elite school where the main thing was that the parents pay for the education, and the academic performance was a student's personal problem. However, when things got really bad, the school management called my mom and complained about me. You think my mom scolded me? Not at all. My mom said if I corrected my grades, she would take me to Paris for Fashion Week. She knew I'd been dreaming about it for a long time, so she had no doubt such motivation would make me study harder. And so it happened. I overcame my shyness. I started answering in class. I raised my hand, and I successfully prepared projects. 6 months later, I brought my academic performance to a new level. I proudly told my mom, hoping she would praise me. Of course, she did, but then she said her collection would be presented during the next Fashion Week in Paris, which meant she wouldn't have time to bother with me because she would be running around like crazy there. I didn't get offended. I tried to convince her several times, but after the second and third refusals, I realized it was no use to hope for anything. That's probably when the tipping point happened. I realized my parents didn't care about me at all, so I could do whatever I wanted, and that's exactly what I started doing. I was 14 when I first didn't come home for the night. I just didn't want to go back to a place where no one was waiting for me and no one liked me. I walked around the city all night, not fearing getting into trouble. As I passed the bridge, someone called to me. I thought the passerby just made a mistake, because it's hard to see faces clearly in the dark. I didn't turn around and kept walking. Suddenly, someone grabbed my arm. It was a young man with bright green hair, a lip piercing, and a huge tattoo on his arm. When he saw me, he asked what a little girl like me was doing outside so late at night. He said he was afraid someone might attack me. I replied I wasn't afraid of anyone, and even if something happened to me, no one would be particularly sad about it. Perhaps my answer was unexpected for him, because at first he was confused, and then he asked me to sit with him on a park bench. He was from a bunch of street kids who lived under the bridge. Some of them escaped from an orphanage, others from abusive parents. I listened to their stories, and I sincerely sympathized. I realized that comparing my story with theirs, my problems weren't problems at all. I have a roof over my head, food and clothing, and my parents never hit or beat me. When the guys asked me to tell my story, I felt very uncomfortable. I imagined they would immediately laugh at me and kick me out, saying something like, "Go back to your castle, freaking princess." However, I pulled myself together and told them my story. Unexpectedly, they didn't send me away. They didn't condemn me. They just offered to take me home because people like me don't belong on the street. Still, I had a place to live. I didn't argue with them. I went home. But the next night, I returned to the guys under the bridge again. I decided this time I wouldn't be empty-handed, and brought them a lot of food, drinks, sweets, and clothes. At 14, I had a bank card of my own. My parents constantly transferred money there for my pocket expenses. I didn't spend it because I already had everything I wanted. But this time, it wasn't me who needed purchases, but my new friends, who supported me and listened to me. Of course, the guys didn't expect this at all. So, at first, they were very surprised. Then, they were filled with joy. They literally attacked the food. Some of them said they were trying Swiss chocolate for the first time in their life, or they had never drank fresh juice. On the one hand, I was sad for them because these things were normal for me, but on the other, I was happy I could make them happy. So we became friends. Sometimes I would run to them under the bridge, and we would walk around the city all night. Or we just chatted, laughed, and told each other scary stories sitting by the fire. In this group, I first tried a lot of things good girls don't usually try at 14. You know, my parents didn't even notice something was happening to their daughter. I think they'd completely forgotten about my existence. But one morning, I went out to have breakfast with them. These were the rare days when Mom and Dad were at home. I got my hair dyed bright pink. My dad unstuck his face from his iPhone, and my mom almost dropped her toast. I was glad my parents finally noticed me. My mom remarked she didn't give me her permission to change my hair color. I replied I didn't need her permission. And anyway, I didn't care about her opinion at all. She didn't care about mine, so why should I? It was the first time we had a serious fight ever. My dad said he didn't like my tone, and I said someone just didn't teach me how to behave, because this someone constantly disappeared on business trips and in his office. Anyway, word for word, scandal. I left the house, slamming the door behind me. Of course, I went to my favorite place, under the bridge. They were surprised to see me in the afternoon, and asked me what had happened. And I just sat there and cried, finally letting out all my resentment towards my parents. I didn't come home that day, or the next day either. Mark, who was the leader of the group, allowed me to stay with them until I wanted to go home. But I wasn't sure I'd ever want to. When I ran away from home, I didn't take any money or some spare clothes with me. It was getting cold outside, and I knew I had to think of something. And I suggested to the guys we rob my house. I knew the idea sounded pretty crazy, but actually, it was a brilliant plan. I knew the password to the security system. I knew where the password to the safe in my dad's office was. I knew where my mom's jewelry and expensive clothes were. If we took out as much as possible from the house, we could sell it, find some housing, and stock up some food before winter comes. Of course, the guys doubted that everything would work out. Still, they agreed we'd succeed with my help. It was just a matter of waiting until both my dad and mom were away on their business trips again. There would be only the butler, the housekeeper, and the cook left in the house. I already knew they soundly slept at night. But then something happened that I didn't expect. My parents started searching for me. I was really sure they only breathed a sigh of relief when their unwanted daughter ran away from home. But they used their connections and put missing ads everywhere. My face was everywhere in the city, so now we had problems moving around the streets. I could be recognized. I dyed my hair purple, and I always wore Mark's oversized hoodie over my clothes. Most of the time, I didn't show my face, hiding in the shelter under the bridge. But one day, I needed to go to the drugstore for a very necessary female item. You got me, right? I couldn't send the boys there, you know? Anyway, I don't know how, but the pharmacy employee recognized my face and asked the security guard to hold me until the police arrived and took me to the station to hand me over to my parents. After a couple of hours, I was sitting at home in front of my dad and mom, who were drilling me with their eyes. I didn't know what they felt, anger, excitement, joy, but they didn't yell or swear at me. They just asked where I'd been all this time and what I'd been doing, and why I hadn't been home for over a week. Probably, I shouldn't have thought they didn't care about me. Mom seemed to get older for this week. Dad's face turned gray and pale, and there was a deep furrow between his eyebrows. They were worried. They did care. I burst into tears, hugged them, and said I missed them so much. The whole next week was like a fairy tale for me. My mom and dad were at home. They talked to me. We went to the movie theater and the cafe together. We did all the things I'd been dreaming of as a kid. But then they left again, and I was alone. Not really, though. Now I had a security guard who was supposed to monitor all my movements. My parents probably thought I'd run away again. And I really wanted to run away, but just to see the guys. Because that day, I unexpectedly disappeared. I was sure they had lost me, and they didn't know what had happened. But there was no hope I would be able to go anywhere. And then, I came up with a plan. I started behaving horribly. I argued and I was rude to teachers. I wore some extravagant clothes to school that contradicted any social norms. I could easily go into a store and break a few bottles, just to make my guard nervous. One day, when he was again distracted by the store manager, paying her for property damage, I managed to slip out the door and run as fast as I could to the bridge. Seeing me, the guys rushed to hug me. They started bombarding me with questions about where I disappeared and where I'd been all this time. I told them that I'd been found and returned home. Now they forced me to go everywhere with a security guard who controlled my every move. They suggested I go back to live with them under the bridge, but I had a better plan. Even though I was back home, I still didn't mind the guys robbing my family. And by the way, living at home, I could help them much better. This time, they didn't refuse. We had planned the robbery for the following weekend when only the butler would be home. The rest of the staff were released to see their relatives and friends. The plan was that I would lock the sleeping butler in his room, put a sleeping pill in the guard's tea so that this muzzle rock would also be knocked out, and then let the guys in the house who would take out everything they could carry. In my opinion, the plan was just great, and its execution was also perfect. Smith, the butler, fell asleep around midnight. When I heard his rhythmic snoring, I immediately locked him in the room. I treated the guard with a cup of tea and a piece of cake, as if apologizing for my bad behavior. He thanked me and drank the tea, not even noticing a horse dose of sleeping pills. 5 minutes later, he passed out on the couch in the living room. At this point, I just opened the front door for the guys, who were wearing black masks, and led them first to my parents' bedroom, where they took all the jewelry, and then to my dad's office. Strange, but we couldn't open the safe. But we found an impressive stack in my dad's desk. The plan went too smoothly. The guys left, and I went back to my room and fell asleep. In the morning, when my parents would discover the loss, I would say I was asleep and didn't hear anything. My parents came back in the morning. The first thing that surprised them was that no one met them, though Smith was usually at the door asking them how their flight was. And then they saw the security guard sprawled on the couch in the living room. Something was strange. And then they went up to the bedroom and saw a terrible mess. I woke up because my mom was screaming. Later on, they noticed the loss. And then it all started happening too fast. They unlocked Smith's door, woke up the guard, and called the police. When the officers arrived, they immediately demanded the videos from the security cameras. Damn, I hadn't thought of that. I didn't even notice we had them at the house. It turned out we had several cameras, on the porch, in the hallway, in the kitchen. And everyone saw what really happened. How I put the sleeping pills in the guard's tea. How I locked Smith's door. How I let the robbers in and almost kissed them goodbye. My parents looked at the screen, and both of them turned pale, not believing I had really organized a robbery in my own house. I didn't make any excuses. I didn't explain anything. I just went to my room in silence, not wanting to know what my parents and the police would do in this situation. And 20 minutes later, an officer came for me, who said I was under arrest. He read me my rights and took me to the police station, where I was in custody until further clarification of the circumstances. It turned out my parents personally gave their consent to send me to prison, and they didn't even do anything to protect me. Although, when I was taken out of the house, I saw only disappointment and condemnation on their faces. At that moment, I thought I had lost my parents forever. And then all hell broke loose. I was taken to the police station and put in a temporary detention cell along with other prisoners. It was a gray room with a cold, dirty floor and some insects running around. And from the corner, I think I could hear mice rustling and squeaking. I don't know who was in the same cell for what, but the man who was sleeping in the corner smelled awful. And the woman was constantly coughing and wiping her nose with the sleeve of her own jacket. It was all so disgusting, dirty, and filthy that I couldn't stand it and started crying. How did I come to this? How could my parents do this to me? But I was no better myself. Robbing your own home is not just a teenage prank, you know. I don't know how long I'd been crying. But later I heard an officer coming for me and taking me for questioning. I told him everything. I totally took the blame, saying the guys were just my accomplices. I promised if I talked to them, they would return everything. And an hour later, Mark was brought to the police station. We had a face-to-face interrogation, and he confirmed my story. I didn't know what was going to happen to me. So, when I got back to my cell, I just laid down on the floor and started crying again. I woke up when someone was shaking my shoulder. It was an officer who said I was being released because the charges against me were dismissed. Later, I saw my mom and dad. My mom burst into tears and held out her arms to me. I was so happy hugging her. When we arrived home, we had a long conversation. I told my parents everything that bothered me, why I was acting like this, and that I just really wanted my parents to love me and show their love. They apologized. They said now they realized how much they lost, giving priority to their jobs instead of spending more time with their daughter. And then they confessed the arrest and charges were fake. Just the police officer understood the story and suggested holding me in a cell for one day, just to scare me and put my brains together. That same evening, my parents and I flew to France for a family vacation together. Now I can confidently say our family relationship changed a lot. Now we're a happy and very close family that underwent some difficult times. Tell me, would you be able to forgive your parents and start all over again? Write your answers in the comments below. Don't forget to like my story and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so that you never miss the new videos. Bye!